Okay, Trevor, good morning. Great to see everyone. I'm really glad we had the opportunity to get together before Pesach one last time. And this topic that was sent out was the most important idea for Pesach during difficult times. I think there's so much discussion. I hear it a lot in the halls of UJA. Even one of the questions at our L'chaim was, when there are certain things going on, how do you celebrate the holiday of freedom when that's not felt by everybody? And the question is, how do we enter into this Pesach, which, just like we say, Manishtana halayla zeh, what's different about this night? I think we can all agree that for many of us, we can say Manishtana, what's so different or how different this Seder is from any other Seder over the course of, our lives, possibly, at least my own, in terms of what has happened in Israel, what's happening to the Jewish people. And therefore, I found that maybe there's an opportunity to share something which I think will be very valuable for us to bring around the table, for us, for the adults around the table, and ultimately as well as passing that on to the next generation. A couple nights ago, I gave a class. We did something with UJ with some, couples in the city, and we did a class on the importance of questioning. And then afterwards, because it was all about questioning, I opened it up for questions. And somebody had asked, should we change some things in the Seder this year a little bit to make it more relevant? Which is an honest and beautiful question. But my answer was that I don't think we have to change anything. I think the beauty of the Seder is that it's always been timeless. We still have it 3,000 years later, and we just have to look at it through the modern day lens of what's going on in life. And we'll find things inside of it that we might have never even realized their potency until now. And I was thinking about my answer, which I believe to be true, and why that's actually the case. And I think the primary thing to first keep in mind as we start this little journey for the next few minutes is that the majority of Jewish history, the Pesach Seder, was said during difficult times. Meaning for me and you, we're thinking and saying, you know what, for the past 50 years, I've been sitting in my home, around my table or at a Pesach program hotel somewhere. It's been relaxing. It's been fun. The Jewish people have been going through great times, prosperity. It's amazing. Little blips here and there, but you know what? It's awesome. And all of a sudden, this year comes and we feel that it's a very different year. But the truth is, the majority of Jewish history, when the Seders were spoken, they were spoken during very difficult times. So when we think about destruction of temple and exile, when we think about crusades, when we think about pogrom, when we think about inquisitions, when we think about a Holocaust, the Seders weren't only happening in times of freedom and joy. The Seder was there every single year of Jewish history. And as we know, the reason why we feel so blessed is because we're living in possibly the greatest period of Jewish history ever. But the majority of Jewish history had its challenges and struggles. And it was during those times also that they celebrated Pesach and sat down at the Seder. And at the Seder, they sat down like free people. They sat down as royalty. They sat down remembering that God has an eternal bond, loves them, and will always be there for them. And if they could sit down at their Seders and sit back and eat their matzah, have their celebratory meals, put on their fine clothing, and sing the songs of redemption, well, then we definitely can do that also. And I like to bookend it with two examples. And one of them I actually shared recently at the L'chaim for the staff at UJA. There's a beautiful sefer. It's actually an introduction to a sefer. It's called Ein Dima, the introduction, by Rabbi Yeshua Grunstein. He was a great Rav that lived in Hungary. He was a survivor. He passed away 1969, 1970. And he speaks about when he was a Rav in this town in Hungary, when the Germans were coming in, obviously later in the war, as we know. And one of the customs that we're all too familiar with, that the Nazis like to do, is specifically around holiday time, they would like to really show who they were. So, when it came to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they said, oh, who determines life and death? God decides. Does God decide? Does we decide? And they would just, in any way they could possibly go, when fast days would come, they would give them more food and no food before fast days, specifically to break their spiritual resistance, because I think deep down they knew that our spiritual connection is what fuels our ability to have physical existence. So they came into this town in Hungary, and it was Pesach time. And they turned to the rabbi, and they knew their Jewish cycle. They studied their books. They understood what we were about. They said, we realize this coming Shabbos is Shabbos HaGadol. It's the great Shabbos, the Shabbos before Passover. And you guys have a custom for sermons on this great Shabbos. Well, isn't it a great Shabbos for you to give this beautiful sermon to your people? So what's a rabbi going to say to his people as the Nazis just come marching in before Passover, and by this point they know what's going to be happening? So I could not imagine stepping up to a pulpit. Tomorrow will be easy for me, right? Stepping up to that pulpit was an impossible task for him to do. And he thanks God that the following words came into his mouth. He says at the beginning of a Haggadah that we're going to be reading in just a couple days from now, we're going to say the words Hashata Hacha L'Shana Haba Ba'arad Yisrael. Now we are here, and next year we will be in Israel. And he asks the following question. He says, why is it that this Haggadah starts with saying, now we are here? That's obvious. Meaning, whenever the sages don't have to write something, they don't write it. They don't want to keep us at the table longer than we have to be with their words. They prefer our own words. It could just say, hey guys, we're sitting down at the table because next year in Jerusalem. Why does it have to say something along the lines of, hey guys, we're here right now, and next year we'll be in Jerusalem? I know where I am now. I might not remember where I was yesterday. I have no clue where I'm going to be tomorrow. But the one thing you don't have to ask me is, Rafi, where are you right now? So he says, why is it that it says that? And he explains the following. Listen to this beautiful idea. He says, Chevra, listen, saying in 1944, the Jewish history of what's happening both in Poland and throughout their ancestry. He says, guys, we're here. The Jewish people are still here after thousands of years of exile, after having gone through all those things that I just described in sheer words, which we understand were generations of torture and torment. Hey, Chevra, guess what? We're still here. If you remember, there's that famous piece, I'm happy to send it afterwards to everybody if you haven't seen it. I'm sure you have. The one by Mark Twain about the immortality of the Jew. The Romans, the Babylonians, the Greeks, they rose. All these nations were stronger, bigger, more powerful than us. And he says now they're just in the twilight. And the Jewish people somehow saw them all, beat them all, and are still showing the strength stronger than ever with that one hand tied behind their back, with most of the world still usually against them. He says, Hashata Hacha, we're here. What does that mean? It means we believe in the miraculous. And if we can all agree that the fact that we still exist in the year 1944, or you and I and everyone around our tables can still agree that we still exist in the year 2024, surrounded by nations that want to genocidally destroy Israel, and that can even march the streets and say those words as well. But if we can believe that we're still here after Jewish history going through that, then he said, guys, in 1944, L'Shana Haba Ba'arad Yisrael, you and I can believe that next year we'll be in Israel. Now remember, those words were said in 1944. We hadn't been in Israel as a sovereign nation in close to 2,000 years. Now you can say he was wrong because it wasn't next year, it was 4 years later. But 4 years later, after one of the darkest periods in Jewish history, Hashata Hacha, here we are. And therefore, I think one of the things that's important about the Seder is not a night of depression, a night of difficulty. It's a night of realizing the fact that we have a miraculous existence. And if I can believe now in 2024 that we are here, I can believe that next year we'll see the ultimate geula. You'll say, oh, Rafi, you're being so naive. Tell that to Rabbi Grunstein in 1944, when it seems like the decimation of the Jewish people are at the doorstep. And yet somehow that is the beginning of the birth of the state of Israel and the strongest period of Jewish history ever since temple time. That's the messaging we have to bring into our Seders. It's one of tremendous optimism and hope. Obviously, we spill wine for certain things. We eat maror because there's difficulty. We acknowledge that. Under a chuppah, for God's sakes, we smash a cup because we realize, even though this is a great simcha, we realize we're not ignoring the fact that there happens to be challenges that the Jewish people face. But Hashata Acha, we're here. We're always going to be here, and we know that tomorrow is going to be a better day. And that's the Seder that recently took place in the lifetime of people that are walking this planet right now, and they thought that might be the end of the Jewish people. But I want to take us all the way back to show you that this isn't a new interpretation. This is an interpretation at the core of what Pesach is about. So in a couple of days, we're also going to read about this whole chevra that get together. Maisa Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azari, Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Tarfon Shayu Mesubim b'Bnei Brak. You have this whole chevra of rabbis, and they're having their Seder in Bnei Brak. And the question that the commentaries ask is, what are they doing in Bnei Brak? Is there a Pesach program there? Why are all these rabbis there? Did they get called to speak and now they're just sitting afterwards? Why aren't they home with their families? What are they doing together at this moment? And the discussion says, you know who happens to live in Bnei Brak out of that group? The one who's indigenous to Bnei Brak is actually Rabbi Akiva. They're all at Rabbi Akiva's for Seder that night. And the commentaries say, well, why? Why is Rabbi Akiva hosting everybody? And according to many, that this Seder took place just after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, after the destruction of the temple. So up until then, Jewish history, there was only one Pesach program. The Pesach program was in Jerusalem at Har HaBayis on Temple Mount. That was the only Pesach hotel program. Everybody went there. That was the dining hall. For the first time in decades, now that has been closed down. The temple's no longer there, and everybody's in a panic. What do we do? How are we going to exist? Where do we go? And all of a sudden they say, you know what? I think we need Rabbi Akiva. Why is it that they need Rabbi Akiva? So there's a Gemara in Makos, the end of the tractate of Makos on page 24a and b. I won't read it inside, but I'm happy to send it. It says, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Akiva, the Chevra that we just mentioned, some of them, they're all together, and they're walking towards the Temple Mount, and they hear the noise of the Romans. And when they get there, they start seeing what's happening, and they all start crying. And it says, Rabbi Akiva is masachik, he's smiling. Amar lo mipnei ma ata masachik. All these rabbis say, Rabbi Akiva, what are you laughing about? Why are you smiling? Amar lehem v'ata mipnei ma atem bochim. Why are you guys crying? And they say, what do you mean? Look at what's happening. Look at what these Romans are doing. So Rabbi Akiva says, listen, when I see what they're doing and what's happening to us, I think to myself, this is what our enemies are enjoying right now, and these are people who live for destruction and pain and evil. I just keep thinking that us, who are God's children, doing our best, how much more we have in store for us when he decides it's time for us to be on top. And then they continue walking more, and they see Temple Mount, and they see a fox walking out of where was the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies, and they tear Kriya. They literally tear their clothing in distress and mourning. And again, Rabbi Akiva is sitting there with a smile on his face. They're saying, why are you smiling? He says, why are you crying? He says, that's the Holy of Holies. Only the Kohen Gadol was able to go into the Holy of Holies once a year, and now there are foxes going? And he says, you want to know why I'm smiling? I'm smiling because the prophets already told us. The pasuk says as follows. It says, Al Har Tzion sheshamem shualim hochubo. On the desolate mountain, there'll be foxes going. It was a prophecy that was going to happen. But he says, you know what? There's another prophecy that says is going to happen as well. The prophecy of Od Yoshvu Zakenim Zakenas Berchovos Yerushalayim, that one day there will be the elders, the old women and the old men sitting in the streets of Yerushalayim. He says, and if we can believe that the prophecy of destruction will happen, I'm telling you the possibility of rebuilding is going to happen as well. And in fact, that's concretized in our Haggadah as well. After the Haggadah story is said, we end it off with a bracha. And again, Rabbi Tarfon, one of the chevra that's at the Rabbi Akiva Pesach program, Rabbi Tarfon gives the following suggestion. He says, let's end off our Seder with a blessing that says, Asher ga'alnu v'ga'alas avaseinu mitzrayim. Thank God who redeemed us and our forefathers from Egypt. And Rabbi Akiva says that's not enough. It's not enough. And you'll see it in your Haggadah. He says you got to add on the following. Kain Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosenu, so too may our God and the God of our forefathers, Yagienu l'moadim l'orgim acherim, may we have more holidays and more festivals, habaim l'krasenu l'shalom, that should come to us in peace. Smechim b'vinyan irechas, we rebuild Jerusalem, v'sasam b'avodasecha, and we take joy in your service, v'nachal sham in apsachim, and we once again have the Korban Pesach again in Yerushalayim. See, Rabbi Akiva understood that the power of the entire Seder experience was not the understanding that we're celebrating just the past Geula, but that we're reminding ourselves that there is going to be a future one. You know, I think that we were living through times like that just this last week. I saw this article that was put out. If I can find your desk, it's a little messy. That happens to rabbis on Erev Pesach. Kind of think accountant tax time, rabbi Pesach time. So this past week, we all woke up, or after Shabbos, turned on the news to what was happening in Israel and Iran with the missiles. And at first, obviously, there was a tremendous fear and pachad. But afterwards, when a person thinks about it, right, 300 missiles, you saw the news of one of them being pulled out of the Dead Sea, what the size of it was like, right? 300 missiles thrown at Israel and not one. So this article says, it quotes someone from a physics professor in Israel who worked in the defense industry. And he notes as follows. He says, from a scientific and statistical perspective, what happened in Israel last Motzei Shabbat was not less than the scale of the splitting of the Red Sea. To be so coordinated and precise to prevent 99.9% from entering into Israel was nothing short of a miracle of the proportions of the splitting of the sea. What just happened was unbelievable. In fact, it's interesting. It says that during the time that the missiles were being fired into Israel, the number one Google search I saw reported was the word Tehillim, Psalms, that the Jews called out in prayer. And there aren't many things that I say that I feel like, wow, I really love that idea that I just came up with. And I think I came up with this one, and I really like it. So we recited Tehillim. Thank God everything worked out okay. If you know how to say the word missile in Hebrew, the word for missile in Hebrew is tilim, with a tes, not a tuf. They sent tilim over to us. They sent missiles over to us, and we said Tehillim. And at the end of the day, our Tehillim beat their Tilim. Our prayers and belief in God, through the tremendous miracles of all the defense force that's there and the technology, but the miraculous nature of what achieved that night, we won and they lost. And the message that we should bring into Pesach, and I think that this is one of the greatest, I'm going to almost say fears of Jewish community, is we get so into the mire and the depression of anti-Semitism and the difficulty. Dayenu, enough. What does Dayenu mean? Dayenu means as things were happening for the Jewish people, they weren't perfect, but they said, Dayenu, it's enough to say thank you. God, you took us out of Egypt. Wow, thank you. God, you split the sea. Thank you. God, you gave us manna in the desert. Thank you. God, we beat Amalek. Thank you. Is it perfect? It's not perfect, but there's more than enough to say, Dayenu, thank you for everything we've got. And we believe that just like we saw the Geula take place in the past, just like we're seeing miracles in our day, I do believe that in our lifetime, we might be meriting seeing the ultimate Geula that will come as well. So I think the message we take into our Seders this year, even more so, is a message of hope, but not just hope out of the sense of belief that's not founded on anything. It's hashata hacha. It's understanding the miracle of Jewish existence is why we're here. And if I can believe the miracle of Jewish existence today, L'Shana Haba Ba'ar Yisrael, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim Habnuyah. Next year, we will all be celebrating. It might not be next year, 1944 to 1948, but it might just be that all the faces around here and names will be celebrating in the Pesach program in the holy city of Jerusalem. Next year, we should merit to see that. Chevra, wishing everyone a Chag Kosher V'Sameach. I'll stop the recording. Obviously, if anyone has any questions, please feel free. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.